Welcome. Happy Thursday. Happy June. Welcome to our Boys Will Be Boys expert interview series. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Rebecca Barjaki, and I'm the Director of Communications and Research at the Representation Project, which is a nonprofit organized by our founder, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, that uses films and campaigns to challenge harmful gender norms and stereotypes. And this interview is part of a larger series that is called Our Boys Will Be Boys campaign. And the goal is to expose how traditional masculinity restricts boys and men, and also to create a space where they can reach their full human potential. So Boys Will Be Boys is kind of a play on words, meaning that they can be anything and everything they want to be without the constraints of restrictive masculinity. And this interview today is part of an ongoing series. We've had some amazing talks with people in the past, and we have some amazing talks coming up. But today, I am very delighted and honored to be interviewing a friend and colleague and a partner of the org, Dr. Linda Tuncay Zayer. And I appreciate that she put the pronunciation of her name in the bio, so I got it right, hopefully. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Linda Tuncay Zayer. So she is a professor of marketing and the John F. Smith Jr. Chair in Business Administration at the Quinlan School of Business at Loyola in Loyola University in Chicago. Her research takes a transformative perspective, exploring issues at the intersections of gender, advertising, and marketing and well-being, including areas such as transformative advertising research. She has been published in the top journals in the field and is the co-editor of the book Gender, Culture, and Consumer Behavior and the forthcoming book Transformative Advertising Research. Her expertise and scholarship have been featured in numerous media outlets, and she serves in a leadership capacity and on the editorial boards of the top advertising journals. Dr. Zayer also serves on various boards, including the Association of National Advisors, See Her Education Academic Advisory Board, which I think we'll talk about in the interview, and the advisory board for GenMac, which is Gender, Markets, and Consumers, in the working group for SDG number 5, Gender Equality for the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education Initiative. Whew, that's a mouthful. There's a lot of accolades there. Welcome, Linda. It is so nice to have you here and to be able to talk with you about the work you're doing.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's really an honor to be here with you today.
Well, let's jump right in. So I know about some about what your work is and a little bit about your path, but I'd love to know more, and I want everybody to learn more too. So can we start off by learning more about your path to this career promoting healthy masculinity for boys? You know, what's your personal story? How did it become a major part of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Healthy masculinities, especially as it relates to advertising and marketing, is an issue that I feel really strongly about, both personally and professionally. So in my research, as you just mentioned, I seek to work across academia and beyond with different industry, nonprofit stakeholders to promote this idea about transformative advertising research. So this is a subfield that my co-authors, Lauren Guerreri and Catherine Coleman, and I proposed, that seeks to use the power of advertising for social good. And that can be representation, storytelling, and importantly, that should be about driving positive impacts in society. So I've always been very interested in how media shapes our ideas about gender, even from an early age. So I have this letter that I had written to the executives of ABC when I was like 15, 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
That my mom has saved all of these years, where I critique the way that they portray one of the female leads in one of their popular TV sitcoms. So over the years, I just got even more interested in this idea about gender in media, having worked in advertising and marketing myself before becoming an academic. So when I started my PhD program at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, I read hundreds of studies of the stereotypical ways that women were portrayed in advertising and film. And I began to ask the question of how boys and men were portrayed. And I very quickly found out that the research was actually very limited when it came to examining portrayals of men from a perspective of gender and masculinities as socially constructed. So I observed a gap there in the scholarship that was being conducted, and I decided to do my research, specifically my dissertation on how men and masculinities were expressed in the marketplace and in advertising. So that really kickstarted my research on gender and marketing for nearly 20 years now.
Wow.
And I've been fortunate enough to now be involved with a great group of difference makers in and outside of academia to move forward this agenda of positive social change. So it's taken me to lots of cool places, to the United Nations headquarters, and to meet with C-suite executives on inclusive advertising and opportunities to work on with nonprofits like the Representation Project. So that's kind of on the professional side. The topic of healthy masculinities also means a lot to me personally because I have two young boys. And of course, I want a world where they can grow up and reach their full potential. And I see the messages that they're bombarded with, on a daily basis, whether they're watching a film or on YouTube shorts, or what they hear from their peers, or on their sports teams. They're both play travel hockey. And so it's really important to me to help, at least in some small way, help build a society for them and for others where everyone is valued and respected. So that's a little bit about my journey. We know gender is a relational construct. We can't have a thriving society without promoting healthy masculinities. So we see this loud and clear in some of the latest research from the United Nations and others, that gender equality goals cannot be realized without the inclusion of healthy ideals for boys and men in particular.
Yeah. Absolutely. I had a similar realization, starting to do media research and looking at tropes and stereotypes and realizing that gender tropes and stereotypes meant how men are portrayed too, and learning about, the different, the violent trope and the Marlboro Man and the hyper rational and masculine. It was just like kind of an eye opener for me too, to see media in a new way. And also, I just love that we're talking about advertising and marketing, because a lot of times when we're having conversations around media literacy, we're talking about, entertainment media feels like it's obviously film and television and video games, sometimes music, but advertising and marketing is such a huge part of that and has such a huge impact on us, which is actually a great segue into my next question for you. Is I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the power of advertisements in particular, and what power does it have to shape societal conceptions of manhood and masculinity?
Yeah, that's such a powerful question. Advertising and media is not the only factor, of course, that shapes our ideas about gender, but it is an extremely important vehicle of meaning in society. There is a large body of research that demonstrates that media and advertising impacts how we think about ourselves, how we relate to each other, and in particular, gender norms and expectations in society. Because what it does is, of course, it legitimizes and elevates certain ideals about gender and masculinity over others. Right. So many people have probably heard about the Scully effect, which emerged from how a female character was portrayed in the 1990s TV show X-Files. So she was a doctor, FBI agent, and it said that girls who grew up watching that show were more likely to have STEM-related careers, for example. And so what we've seen in recent years, how women and girls are really hungry for images that are inclusive, empowering, that show them in realistic and accurate ways. But what is unfortunately lagging is that same conversation about how boys and men are portrayed. Mm-hmm. So nearly 20 years ago at this point, I'm dating myself, but I started a series of research studies that demonstrated that men were actually turned off by stereotypical portrayals of them in advertising and media. And so that was true in 2005 when I published my dissertation research. And that's unfortunately true today, although changing, albeit slowly. But in that dissertation research, so nearly 2 decades ago, when I interviewed men, so in their own words, they said they wanted to be portrayed in multidimensional ways, as we all do, right? But we're constantly confronted with these images that valorize being tough and strong and muscular and focused on money and women and sex and all the tropes that we see over and over again. So I wanted to know, what are the depictions that actually resonated with them, right? And so the two that really jumped out, that the men in my study found the most appealing. So what they like to see in advertising, what spoke to them. One of them was called what I called the family man. So images of them interacting positively, with their family, their partners, their kids. And secondly, portrayals that showed them, pursuing their best life, so to speak. So not necessarily making the most money, or being defined by how much, how much money they made, but excelling at doing whatever it is that they loved. So that could be a nurse, and that could be a teacher, or whatever they wanted to pursue. So you can see that there was this disconnect between what men themselves were saying they wanted to see in advertising and what the images that the industry was by and large generating. So that kind of begged the question, like, what's happening, right? Like, why this disconnect?
Right.
So interestingly, my colleague at TCU, Catherine Coleman, and I decided to interview advertising executives to try and really get at, like, why is this happening, right? Why is there this disconnect? And there were several takeaways from that study, but one key takeaway was that even among men executives who tend to dominate creative departments and advertising industries, there was this idea that men were tough, that they were immune to the effects of advertising, that these gendered messages just didn't affect them, which is a bit wild, right? If you think about, advertising is all about persuasion, after all. Yet these ad executives themselves were saying, oh, we don't have to worry, guys are tough, we don't have to worry about that. And so advertisers need to be cognizant that gendered ads affect everyone.
Right. Wow. And we would have thought maybe that was kind of a basic understanding that we all, but wow. Yeah. It's interesting too, in the work that we've done at the org, and the work that I've done with this organization, with other organizations, working with content creators. We hear kind of how, like, this idea that maybe tropes and stereotypes in advertising matter less because there's less screen time to develop a character over time, and so they don't pop up as much. But in our work, we found that they pop up more. Just feels like they're rife with tropes and stereotypes. And I think maybe because there's such a short amount of time, that in order to cue to the audience certain identities, they really have to, like, lean into these stereotypes and tropes. It's just fascinating. But yeah, wow. The idea that men and boys aren't impacted, the restrictive masculinity at every level of it is just astounding.
Yeah, I do think it's super interesting that, again, even folks that worked in a field where they knew that advertising is about persuasion, and you might think from some of their own lived experiences that there would be this greater sensitivity, but there wasn't. And again, there was this idea that they weren't impacted. So, again, I pull from my research, which when I interviewed men, they do experience negative feelings. They experience feelings of vulnerability, a sense that they are never enough when they see these idealized depictions of masculinity in advertising. I'll never forget, one man I interviewed calling it, this ever elusive chase. You're never going to get to exemplify that ideal man, no matter how hard you try to climb that ladder, no matter how many things you buy. And of course, many marketing campaigns push that idea. If you just get this thing, body spray, cologne, car, drink, whatever,
Right.
that you can be that ideal man. And so I think there is that sense of, again, never quite getting there.
Mm.
It's trying to have that within your grasp, but it's just very elusive. And so, but I do see in some of my work and scholarship of others, we do see this undercurrent of resistance,
Mm.
the agency, where men are starting to redefine what it means, manhood and masculinity, what it means for themselves, what how they can reach their full potential and be their best versions. There's another study that I did just a couple years ago. This was a study I published with my co-authors, Marianne McGrath and Pilar Castro Gonzalez, and we saw this theme of resisting stereotypical advertising across men in 3 different countries. So we looked at US, Spain, and China. And so we shouldn't necessarily think of, individuals or men as these passive receivers of
Right.
advertising messages, right? So they do have agency interpreting and reinterpreting these messages. And you also see more play and freedom in some sense in expressions of gender on social media, which is, I think, very interesting and encouraging. So I am optimistic as we look ahead to the future of gender and advertising and media in that regard.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue into a question that I have, and also someone in the Q&A. And I'll take this moment to say, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. You can do that now and for the rest of the interview. An anonymous attendee asked, well, first said, thank you for sharing these great insights, and asked, what do you want to see in advertising moving forward? And that was sort of my question too. I know you mentioned that, the world of advertising executives is very male dominated. So obviously seeing more women behind the scenes probably, but what else are you hoping for when it comes or how can ads be a positive force for change, and what specifically would you like to see more of?
Yeah, gosh, so much to talk about there, but I would like to see intersectional and multidimensional representations, more diverse storytelling, and a greater focus on impact. So, and I say those 3 things in particular because last year we published a study in the Journal of Advertising, which looked at, we examined award-winning gender inclusive ads. And there's immense power in this 3-pronged approach. So representation of boys and men as multidimensional human beings,
Mm-hmm.
inclusive stories about their lives, and then driving positive social impact. So I feel very strongly that advertising can be a force for good in society. So if it makes sense for your brand and your brand narrative, and that's an important caveat to put there. And we can have a whole nother conversation about that from a business perspective, since I'm a business professor. But make an impact with that story, because brands are in some sense storytellers, right? And so maybe, again, if it makes sense for your brand, maybe that's destigmatizing the idea of boys and men asking for help, or maybe that's showing them as caretakers, or that they can express emotions and things like that. So we know that stories are really one of the most impactful ways to change hearts and minds.
Mm.
So advertisers, marketers absolutely have a responsibility to do right by their consumers and society at large. So one of the key things I think is that we have to hold advertisers accountable, right? And take them on this journey of understanding, because these conversations, a lot of times, again, in some of the research that I've done and the interviews that I've done, when it comes to gender portrayals about men and boys, a lot of times it's just not even on their radar, right?
Right.
So create that awareness, and then invite them on this journey. And different organizations, I think, will have different levels of organizational readiness, in terms of, are they ready to hear and listen to these issues. So I always tell my students that good marketing is based on strong consumer insights, right? And so marketers and advertisers are not necessarily doing that great of a job listening to their consumers sometimes, especially when it comes to how men are portrayed. So there's a lot of work, I think, left to be done.
Yeah, wow. And this is a kind of a curveball question, but just out of curiosity, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience bridging academic research with public research and public activists. I mean, you are an incredible academic activist, and those are my favorite types of people. So how has it been, or, what has your experience been taking that research and like implementing it and making real change with it?
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work, to be honest with you. In some sense, there I think even though we might be working on kind of parallel issues, there does seem to be kind of these silos between academia and
Mm.
industry. And in fact, there's a lot of conversation recently among academics on what does it really mean to have impactful research. A lot of times impact in academia is about how many papers you publish, the how many times you're cited, what is the ranking of the journal that you publish in, which I think there is some space for that. But I feel very strongly that your work cannot just stay on the pages of a journal article with just a small community of folks reading it, right? I think again that's important. Research, past research informs future research, but you need to share your research. You need to disseminate it. You need to give, in my case, advertisers and practitioners tools to use that's going to help them create better informed advertising, and again push forward that positive agenda. But it is a lot of work because a lot of times it's different language that we use. it's different formats that we write in. So there is kind of that translation process that
Right.
that has to occur for sure. So did that answer your question,
Yeah.
Rebecca?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think, being in a nonprofit that does research, similar topics, it's always been fascinating to live at that intersection and like, revere the standards of academic research and want, research and data to be collected in ways that respect the research process, but then also have it be accessible and disseminated in ways that make change. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about it. And also leads me to a question that was asked in the Q&A. You said one of the things that needs to happen is that advertisers need to be given the tools to make the change. And Naomi Davis asks, are there toolkits to help advertisers present gender in unrestricted ways? Or do you have other resources that we can share?
Yes, there is actually. There's quite a few resources that I wanted to point your viewers to. So, and I know you were going to ask me about that a little later, so I'll jump ahead here.
Okay.
Um, so as we were talking about, I'm very passionate about driving an impact, and I think that involves these building of bridges between academia and industry, nonprofit, public policy. So if you're in that space, please, reach out to me. But one collaboration I just finished is with the Association of National Advertisers, Educational Foundation, and See Her. So See Her is a coalition of advertisers and marketers dedicated to the accurate portrayal of women and girls. And students, early career professionals can take free online education modules and earn a gender equity certificate. So this was an initiative with a group of scholars from all over the world working with the AEF and See Her. I think it's a phenomenal resource for advertising industry, for educators, for early career folks. So if you just Google See Her Education. You can learn more about it. I think Rebecca just put the link in the chat. Again, these are open access materials, and it discusses everything from intersectionality to ethical decision making to inspiring social change. There's a career panel again for early career folks that are just starting out in advertising. So a lot of great resources there in terms of gender in advertising. There's also an initiative from the United Nations called the Unstereotype Alliance, which again is doing some really great work at this intersection of eliminating gender stereotypes in advertising. I'm also very proud of a paper that's open access right now through the Journal of Advertising called Driving Impact. And this is a study where we looked at gender inclusive advertising. So please check that out if you get a chance. We propose something called the inclusive advertising spectrum. And so the hope is that the advertisers can, use this as a way to think about what it means to create inclusive advertising. We have another paper in the Journal of Advertising called Transformative Advertising Research. This really maps out a framework, again, that advertisers, other stakeholders can use if they are in that mindset of using advertising as a force for social good. And then I would say more broadly, if you're interested in kind of this stream, I encourage viewers to read about transformative consumer research. So this is what kind of was the impetus for transformative advertising research, but TCR, as we call it, encourages research that benefits consumer welfare and quality of life for people around the world. So a lot of good resources there. I'll also direct folks to go to genmac.co to learn more about research on gender marketing. So a great group of scholars featured there. Again, if you're a student, if you're working in a business and you want to anchor yourself in ideas and frameworks that can help guide you and to do your work in ethical and responsible ways, I think these are some really good resources.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. There are so many good resources and I highly recommend you all check those out. I dropped a couple links in the chat and I know that after this, we will send out an email with links to all of the resources that Dr. Lynn mentioned. And specifically the framework of your own research is just so helpful to look through and read through. I would, highly recommend.
Thank you so much.
One question in the Q&A that I also have is how, if at all, have representations of masculinity shifted in marketing since you first started researching the topic? And I think we can go beyond that, representations of masculinity to just what has changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah, so I think there has been progress, I think, and in terms of gender inclusive advertising, which has been really, exciting and promising to see. I think we have to remain diligent. So a lot of times with social change, as you know, Rebecca, social change is not linear. So right. As you make some strides, there's always a pushback, and it might be one step forward, two steps back. So I think we still need to push forward in a lot of these areas, including depiction of women and girls. But again, I think we are kind of seeing an opening up of the conversation and opening up of spaces for more diverse depictions of men and masculinities and gender portrayals in general. But again, I think it's still pretty nascent. I think that there's a small group of passionate folks having those conversations, but probably not at that scale that I would like to see. So some progress, but again, I think we need to keep pushing forward. And I think, one of the things that's really top of mind is, I think one of the things that you had asked before is, what if I could change something, what would that be? And I think one of the things I've been thinking about lately is how do we ensure that some of the inequities that have been created in what we'll call traditional media are not recreated in spaces that are AI enabled, or the metaverse, for example, or maybe what we call new media. So unfortunately, many of the decision-making spaces in setting ethical standards in these spaces are not inclusive. Without that, there's a real risk of representational harms in these spaces and encountering some of the same, perhaps even more harmful effects on individuals. So there's this great report from McKinsey that came out in 2022 that talks about lack of representation on standard boards and governing bodies, for example. And of course, this is highly problematic. You might have heard, just a couple weeks ago, Meta announced the creation of an AI advisory council, which again lacked representation and diversity. So technology, new media can be a force for good, but it can also be misused and mishandled. So we need to make sure that the social inequities are not recreated, that the representational harm, including unhealthy and restrictive masculinities, is really eliminated in those spaces. So extremely important that all voices are heard at those decision-making tables. And that could be in the creative department of an advertising agency, or it could be, on a policy board.
Yeah, what a great use of the magic wand. If you could change one thing, what would you do? And yeah, just getting me thinking about how advertising is shifting with AI, and you have product placement that's now being done after the fact digitally, and all of the ways that AI is shifting marketing. It's fascinating. Oh my goodness.
It is. And it's so, I think, I think folks are still trying to figure it out, right? There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of tools, but how do we use it effectively? How do we use it in a smart way? And so I think it's still such a nascent area that it's extremely important at these early stages right now to make sure that we're moving forward in a responsible way.
Absolutely. And how scary that the decisions are being made in rooms where there aren't marginalized people. Yeah. So that's so fascinating. Another question from the Q&A. So specifically, you had mentioned about having two boys, and I'm wondering, and also this person in the Q&A is wondering, this anonymous attendee, do you have any advice for parents in terms of how to watch advertisements in marketing and consume it with your kids and sort of build armor for them?
Gosh, great question. And I wish I could say I was an expert on this topic. So I'm strictly speaking, just from my own personal perspective. I mean, it's really tough. It is, even as a gender marketing scholar, it's extremely difficult to navigate because so much of what they see and hear has that social component to it. They game. They're not allowed on social media yet, but when they're gaming with their friends, when they're watching YouTube shorts and things like that. Again, it's very hard to control the content, and so I think trying to have conversations with them, even at an early age, to let them know that they may not quite understand everything right now, but what they're seeing is not necessarily healthy or true, or what is accurate. And so trying to have those conversations with them at a very early age, because it's impossible to control all the content that they're going to see, the conversations that they're going to have with their friends, or what they see, on their sports teams, or at school, or on the playground, or whatever.
Right.
So it's nearly impossible, but again, trying to have those conversations as much as possible and ongoing, right? So, excuse me, my oldest is now going into his teen years, and so, as those conversations, as he gets older, having those conversations again and again to, put those things top of mind. So, gosh, I wish I had kind of the magic answer to that. But I think I'm just a parent like everyone else, just trying to figure that
Right.
out.
Yeah, sort of an impossible task. Another question from Melissa Harcrow. So, do you find that negative comments about inclusive representation discourage women and girls from joining professions that are male dominated? And I'll just add on to that too. What sort of pushback have you had in advocating for inclusive representation? Have you had negative comments in response?
Well, I think the first, I'll take the first question of, does pushback discourage women from entering some of these areas? Yeah, I think inevitably, right? I mean, if you don't feel welcomed and you don't feel a sense of belonging, I think that there could be a hesitancy. So, as long as creative departments are male dominated and advertising agencies and things like that, I think certainly there's going to be some segment of women that are discouraged, right? So, if you can't see her, you can't be her, right? And so I think that that's very important. But I think, if you do want to go into those spaces, and it's not for everyone, I think it's really important to find mentors and advocates and allies that are going to be your support system and, that are going to support you along in that journey. And I think that's been incredibly helpful for me in my career. I've had lots of great mentors that have guided me. If we look at even academia, for example, I'm in a business school, and at the at in the kind of the entry assistant professor level, you see even levels of men and women as professors, but then the higher up you go, the less and less women are represented, right? And so you see that a lot in many professions. And so I think having that support system and
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But then also, if you are able to, right, if you are it's within your power to encourage policies and procedures that are also then building it into the systems, right? Because it can't just be an individual thing. It has to be built into the systems as well. That then creates this inclusivity and sense of belonging. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I guess it wasn't my question. So hopefully I appreciated your answer. And if for the person who asked that, if you have a follow-up, send it right in. So I know you've told us a lot about the work you've done and are doing. How can viewers follow you? Where can they find you in the internet, and how can they support your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave you a lot of different resources, so I hope that he'll look those up. I have various projects in the works that examines boys, men, masculinities, and advertising and social media in particular. So I'd love to hear from groups or individuals if you're interested in that as well. So my hope is really to, scale that impact beyond the pages of an academic journal. So I look forward to that continued engagement with industry, nonprofits, whether that's a research collaboration or a keynote or otherwise. So I'm at the Quinlan School of Business at Loyola University Chicago. My email is ltuncay@luc.edu, or you could find me on LinkedIn, or you could Google transformativeadvertisingresearch.com.
I know I will be Googling transformative advertising research. I just, the idea of doing research. Oh, we have another question, but the idea of doing research that it looks into consumer health, like the idea of marketing research, but from the perspective of consumers and consumer activism, is so fascinating. And I'm just so grateful to learn about it. This question that just came in: from a standpoint of gender being rooted in culture, as someone in marketing, especially trying to pivot to impact marketing, as a person of color and a minority voice at a junior level, how would you form creative briefs while using consumer insights? And then in parentheses, which may be counterintuitive to the mission of driving change and then also driving change. For example, for a particular region, the ideas of what consumers may want may still be somewhat rooted in sexism for certain product categories. How do you then incorporate inclusivity and intersectionality in the communication to not result in backlash? I imagine this is especially prevalent in global activism work too.
Yeah, boy, that's these are all such good questions. So, there's an interesting case of from P&G called Share the Load, and where they had that wonderful campaign across India and other regions. And I think that that is a good mix of consumer insights, but then also pushing the envelope. So pushing against the sexist stereotypes that might, for example, in this case, portray women as the sole caretaker of household and, doing the laundry and taking care of the kids and all the household tasks. And so I think, P&G did a great job there of navigating that space of being true to the consumer insights, but then also pushing it further, pushing against the stereotypes. So in that campaign, which also was an award-winning campaign at the end, showing men doing the laundry. And I know maybe it sounds like something small, but it makes a big difference, right? In terms of, again, showing the possibilities of, what, what a partnership can look like and how to run a household and things like that. So I think that sometimes there is going to be that tension, right? It's not always going to be kind of this very easy thing of, oh, this is what consumers want and let's give it to them. And so I think marketers have to sometimes navigate that tricky space. And the framing of the messaging, I think, is so important. So it's the long game, right? So you really have to build an understanding of not only the consumer, but the cultural landscape and how to frame that messaging that's going to accomplish your business goals and your social change goals. And so that is extremely difficult to do. You have to take the time and get a nuanced understanding. You have to work with other experts, right? So surround yourself with people that have expertise in those different areas. Maybe that's a nonprofit, maybe that's a local community organization, what have you. So build that multi-stakeholder kind of approach, and then kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, I love that. And we all need to stick together. I'm so grateful to have gotten to do work with you in the past and, collaborate in the future too. And we're just so lucky to have you here today with us. So thank you so much, Dr. Tuncay Zayer. Please, everybody, if you have more questions, feel free to send them our way and we can pass them along. And we will be sending out an email with all of the resources that Dr. Zayer mentioned today. And if you loved this interview, we'll be doing it again next week with Byron Hurt talking about male hazing and masculinity, the same time, noon Pacific Standard Time on Thursday, the 13th. And yeah, I know that you can't hear the audience clapping, but everyone's clapping for you. And we're so grateful for you. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone, take care and have a great rest of your week. Bye.